Welcome back to Behind the Badge. I'm Garry McCarthy, and I'm here again with my good friend Steve McAllister, who I can't believe I know him this long, but going all the way back to 1989 when we first got together, playing some football, and then we worked together a lot. We're going to talk about something very serious right now. We're going to have another one of our friends here. We both survived 9/11. You know, it's funny, if somebody mentions 9/11, whoever you're with has to tell you where they were.
Where they were.
And trust me, it's not a bad thing. I'm not saying it's a bad thing. But I've been with 5 or 6 people, you know, at a cocktail party or something like that. And, oh, this is what I was doing. I'll never forget this. I'll never forget that. And oh my God, this. And oh my God, that. And then they go around in a circle. And then eventually they're like, well, wait a second. You were in New York. What were you doing?
Right.
I was there. Probably a seminal moment in our nation's history, let alone in our lives. And as long as I've known Steve, you know, we would get together a couple of times after 9/11, and we would toast our friends, let's put it that way. But we've never actually shared our story with each other. And,
Not really. Yeah.
you know, we were in different places at different times, and we're going to do that now. Hopefully it's cathartic, but I'm interested in that. And, you know, I think it's important that as we come up on 25 years, which I can't believe that's actually the case, that people are reminded of what we went through, what the city went through, what the country went through, and then the subsequent fallout from the military that I don't know if it's ever going to stop, quite frankly. So I'll start at the beginning, which was I was running late for work that day. And as I entered the George Washington Bridge, my cell phone went off, my car phone actually, which was my cell phone. And it was my secretary telling me that a plane had just hit the North Tower of the World Trade Center. So if you know the geography, I just looked down and from the George Washington Bridge, I saw that iconic picture with the gaping hole in the top of the North Tower and the smoke trailing off to the east. And my first thought was, we had just had a pitcher from the Yankees, Corey Lytle,
I remember that.
crashed a plane into an apartment building in Manhattan. So that's kind of the first thing I thought of. And when I looked at that gaping hole, I said, you know, that's much bigger than a Cessna or some small plane. And as I crossed the bridge, I was debating whether or not I was going to go to the scene or go to police headquarters. Of course, everybody runs to the scene. Everybody wants to touch the plane, as they say. And I really didn't have a need to do that. But as I thought about it and looked at that hole, I said, this seems a little bit different. Right. So I picked up my driver, or I should say, yeah, I did pick up my driver because I used to pick him up on the New York side of the George Washington Bridge. And we headed down. We couldn't take the west side or the east side. We went straight down Broadway. And it was already remarkable because you could feel it where people were getting into the intersections to direct traffic to pull emergency vehicles south. And I saw businessmen with you know, $1,000 suits and, you know, probably even a couple of homeless people directing traffic as we kind of serpentined down through Manhattan with a whole bunch of other emergency vehicles coming from places like the Bronx and northern Manhattan to head down to the Trade Center. When I got there, I got there just as the second plane hit the South Tower. And I heard the most incredible transmission over a radio that I've ever heard. There was an officer in emergency service who said, Central, be notified a second plane just hit the South Tower. We're under attack. We need air cover from the military. Now, I'm in the top echelon in the department, and I'm looking at the radio like, does anybody have their phone number?
No.
right? How do we go about this? What is it that we're going to do? And right about that point, I saw Sonny Mandel, who was Mayor Giuliani's press person, standing on a corner next to a retired detective named Billy Cutter, who worked in the 9th Precinct Detective Squad, who I had met through work. And I said, Sonny, do you know where the mayor is? And she says, no, but I could use some telephones because I got to make some calls and notifications. And Billy Cutter says, well, you know, I work right here. Why don't you come on into our office? So I go into the office with her, and it was a big open space with all those partitions and all desks around and a couple of offices off to the side. And I said, oh, wow, look at this. We just got ourselves a nice little command post here. And it was at 75 Barclay, and we parked my car on the sidewalk across the street. And, you know, honestly, I recognized the potential for collapse, but I didn't realize it was going to be that big, 22 acres, right, when it all was said and done.
Yeah, it was hard to conceptualize.
And that's how my day started.
Right.
So.
Well, I was the CO of Taru at the time, and our office was at Fort Totten out by the Throgs Neck Bridge in the end of Queens, if you will. And I actually was going to meet a think tank from Virginia, Answer. They were flying up, ironically. They were flying up to have this meeting. So I was getting into work early, and I don't typically listen to, you know, AM radio or anything like that. Usually throw on some music, you know, just want to cool my head out before I get into work. And as soon as I got to my base, it is pandemonium because the first plane had struck. And I remember one of my sergeants, Lynn Anderson, saying, I says, what's going on? And she says, a plane hit the World Trade Center. And I'm like, oof. So we're going to mobilize all our vehicles and all our equipment. And, you know, as you probably know, but we have equipment that can detect heat, listen for sound, cameras that can be lowered, you know, to retrieve, you know, possible survivors in the pile. We didn't know what we were going to be facing at that point. But all this equipment is preloaded because we typically respond with emergency service on a lot of their jobs. You were lieutenant in emergency service. And emergency service is, for the other police departments, your SWAT, your special operations kind of.
Well, we used to say the best way to describe it is if a civilian needs help, they call 911,
right,
and if a cop needs help, they call emergency service. Because we had all the heavy tools, all the big guns, all the confined space training, hazmat, you name it.
Correct. So we assist them with listening, taking pictures, giving them a tactical advantage to complete their mission. So I had all the tech geniuses working for me. So they all respond, and obviously I'm responding with them. And you know, it's a long drive from Fort Totten, you know, especially when everybody's now fleeing the city and you're going the opposite way. And we came through the Midtown Tunnel, and you could see the building on fire. It was like, and like you, I thought it was a Piper Cub or a Cessna. I'm going, man, that looks like a lot more damage. And then we find out that it was a commercial airliner. But I go through now the West Side Highway, the East River Drive, through the tunnel, and now I'm coming up, and the first building had already collapsed. I don't know this at this point. I'm still making my way. First building had already collapsed. Many of my guys got hurt as a result of that building. Thank God no one got hurt. No one got killed, but a couple of the officers, John Rogers specifically, sustained a serious brain injury and never returned to work after that. George Holmberger, who's a true hero, he was an emergency service cop who came over to Taru, and he basically, firemen carried him out of the wreckage that had now fallen, and ended up blind for a week because all the dust and everything, he had to keep his eyes open so he could carry John out of the pile. So I remember going up to St. Luke's to visit him, and the doctor was pretty good. He was like, he'll be fine. We're going to just keep washing those eyes out. He goes, the eye is an amazing thing. It really repairs itself. And I was like, it was kind of scary. You got one of your cops blind, Anyway, we are now all over the place, and I am trying to come up from the Brooklyn Battery Tunnel through there, that way.
It's all blocked.
It's blocked, and I'm cursing, and I'm trying to get to my men, and now the second building goes down.
So let me just slow that down.
And
a
I'm
little bit.
only a block away, and I'm like, that was probably the most frightened I've ever been.
We'll be right back with more Behind the Badge. People start showing up at this command post because we put out the word that's where we were. We were at 75 Barclay. Tommy Pertell came in, Espo came in, Joe Dunn came in. In and out, in and out, in and out. And we're starting to get information. Tony Carbonetti, the mayor's chief of staff, shows up, along with Denny Young, a whole bunch of Mayor Giuliani's aides, police commissioner, first deputy. And we're starting to kind of get a feeling for what's going on. And I asked Tony, I said, Carbonetti, I said, do you know where the mayor is? He says, yeah, he's at Vesey and West. And that's only about 2 blocks away from where we were, maybe 3.
No.
And, the mind does funny things. There's 2 20-minute periods that I don't remember really anything about it. And this kind of starts one of them, because the next thing I know, I'm standing on Vesey and West, and Mayor Giuliani is having that conversation with Father Judge, who was the chaplain for the police department.
No, fire department.
Fire department.
Yeah.
And the first deputy of the fire department, Tom Von Essen, was also there, the fire commissioner. And we kind of part ways with some of them. And Giuliani says to Father Judge, he said, pray for us, Father. And Judge said, well, I always do. And he was dead within 15, 20 minutes of that conversation. We got the mayor back to 75 Barclay, but this is when the bodies were coming off the top of the building.
No.
And Steve, I really don't remember it, but when there was a French camera crew there, who actually recorded it.
Yes, they did.
And when I saw that video and heard the sound of the bodies hitting the ground, I almost jumped out of my skin.
Yeah.
And that's when it kind of came back. So we get back to 75 Barclay. We're moving forward. We got directions coming in. We've got a citywide mobilization going on. And I'm standing. Mayor Giuliani is in a room like right behind me where this screen is, and he's talking to the vice president. We find out that all the planes in the country are grounded, but there's a couple of them that are still missing, and those are the ones that end up in Shanksville and the Pentagon. All of a sudden, there's this roar, and the room starts filling up with dust. Lights flicker, go out, and I'll never forget this sound. It was cha-chunk, 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 cha-chunk. And what it turned out to be was the floors falling on top of each other as the building cascaded down. I don't know how long it took. I'm sure we could figure that out from watching video, right? But it seemed like it went on forever. And when it finally stops, everybody had jumped onto desks and so on and so forth. And I'm thinking in my mind, is that explosions? Are there mortar attacks now happening? Are they coming up out of the subways with hand grenades?
Right.
What's going on? And the only thing I could think to do was take my gun out. And I'm behind a partition with my gun out. And I'm like, okay, let's try and figure out how to get out of here. Espo jumps up and he says, nobody move, I'm gonna see. And he goes, tries to go out the front, comes back, he says, no, it's blocked. Okay, so now Giuliani's security team is going to take the lead, and we start following him. We go around in a circle, we're not getting out anywhere, everything's blocked. Then we start going upstairs. And I said, why are we going upstairs when we're on the ground floor? And then they come back and say, no, that's blocked too. I'll never forget it. Rudy was like from me to that camera away, and I said, everybody effing stop because I saw an exit sign, a glow of an exit sign. And I grabbed my driver. I said, Domingo, let's go see if we could get out this way. So I put my hand on the wall, and I feel a doorknob. It's not hot. I open it. Okay, that's good. So we get to the next wall. Same thing. I open the door, and there's a rush of air. And I'm like, great, we're out. But no, there's a gate. There's a gate outside the door, and I just know that that gate's going to be locked.
Right.
And I reach out and I turn it, and it opened. And I was like, okay, great. Domingo, stay here, keep these doors open. I'm going to go get everybody. So I go inside, and everybody isn't there. Some people had found their own way to get out, which, okay, fine. But
Right.
I didn't like the idea that they let me go down the hallway by myself.
Right.
And naturally, Espo's there waiting for me. And I said, Joe, come on, I got a way out over here. And he says, hold on, Gary, are we better off outside or inside? I'm like, I don't know, Joe.
Yeah.
But
We didn't have a lot of information at that point.
you're the chief of the department, and we got to get outside, and you got to take charge. And in typical Espo fashion, he says, okay, but let's go back in and make sure we didn't leave anybody. And I'm like, right there, we can get out. Okay, Joe, and we did. And that's a little foggy for me, too. I don't really remember it, but I'm told we got a couple of people who came out with us now on the backside of that building that we were in. We get out to Broadway just in time to hear the creaking and the roaring start again, and we look up, and there's the South Tower coming down right on top of us.
That's right about when I was arriving.
Ducked into a hallway, and it was kind of like a nuclear holocaust coming by. Big cloud of debris and
Remember that?
dust. And oh yeah, that part I remember. And so took us a little time to kind of get ourselves together and get out of there because that got blocked a little bit. But now we're saying, where are we going? Joe, where are we going? Police commissioner's not with us. The mayor isn't with us. Joe Dunn.
He was missing for a while, if you remember.
Who was?
Joe Dunn. We weren't sure where he was.
No, he wasn't really missing. Of course, that's the funny
Remember
story.
He was limping. He had tore his Achilles.
He was on crutches because he tore his Achilles,
Yeah.
right? We happened upon a canine vehicle, and we took Joe Dunn and got him into the back of the canine vehicle. And I'll never forget the picture. Joe Dunn, you know, is a big, strapping, formidable man, right?
Yeah.
And he's sitting on a dog cage in the back of it, and just like we closed the door, and it reminded me of like the old westerns where you throw the cowboy over the horse and smack him in the butt and say, yeah, and they'd take off.
Get out of here.
So Joe ends up driving away, and now Espo and I trying to decide what to do. And we decide that we're going to go to City Hall Park, which is only a couple of blocks away. But it's a low-lying area with big buildings around it, and it's got a fence, which is a defendable perimeter. So we're going to bring in a command vehicle, the what do we call them again? The communications trucks?
Mobile command
Mobile command
center.
units.
You know.
We're going to bring one of those in and get some emergency service cops with heavy weapons because we don't know what's going on.
Right.
We're at war,
Yeah.
right? We're at war, and we don't know how many people we just lost.
Oh. Yeah. We have no idea.
So this goes on, and we got that happening for a little while. And then all of a sudden we heard planes, and it was like, oh crap, more incoming.
Oh, when the
And I-
F-15s flew over.
And I look
Yeah, it
up,
scared the hell out of
and I
me,
see
too.
two F-16s going wingtip to wingtip up the Hudson River between buildings. And in a split second, I had three thoughts. Oh my God, more incoming. Oh, thank God they're ours, too. Jesus Christ, the military's protecting New York City.
Right. No.
And that was one of the more bizarre things that occurred that day, and in a scenario where a lot of bizarre things happen. Somehow, Joe Dunn gets a phone call into Espo, and he says, I'm back at police headquarters. I evacuated the building, and command and control is being staffed by volunteers, and we're going to start here. So we actually have a three-way argument. It's like, Joe, that's a target. We can't go back to police headquarters. We don't know what they're going to do next. And being Joe Dunn, he kind of told us to shut up and get our butts over there, which eventually we did. But I was so convinced that it was the stupidest thing that I could ever do in my life.
Well, it definitely was a target.
And the interesting thing is, you know, I had a very conscious thought of my father. My father, as you know, was a World War II Marine, got shot, blown up, and provided leadership to a lot of people. And at that point, I had already spoken to people. I had the opportunity to speak to people who were on places like Guadalcanal and Iwo Jima with my dad.
Right.
And they told me stories about him being fearless. And I had a very conscious thought of him and what would he do.
Right.
Full well knowing that you could die by going there, he would have went because he was providing leadership.
Right.
The most fascinating thing about that is I didn't think of that moment for another 2 weeks. It was something that just, you know, we were busy, right? And there was no time really reflecting on what was going on.
Yeah, we didn't have too much reflection time.
We'll be right back with more Behind the Badge. So I'm sorry, that's where we are now after both collapses.
Yeah. So I find myself ducking in the wheel well as the building is collapsing around me, and hoping, praying. I had just had a newborn son. I had the two older children, but I just had a new baby, and I'm kind of hoping I get to see this kid grow up, you know. So I'm fully figuring I'm biting the bucket here, you know. A lot of thoughts are going through your head. Thank God I survived. Found an ambulance, got in the ambulance. My father had just passed away in August of that year from emphysema. So I was familiar with how to put the little collars on the top of the oxygen bottles. So when everybody else responded, I just handed them oxygen and a saline solution to wash their eyes out, wash their throats out. And I remember John Like, one of the lieutenants, he comes in, and I says, drink this, wash out your throat and everything. He goes, yeah, you think this it's not going to upset my stomach or, you know, whatever? And I says, dude, you just swallowed a building. You know, seriously, take it. So anyway, I realized I had to get out of there once more people started showing up, because the only thing you could really see in the dust storm was the lights of the ambulance just blinking.
Yeah.
And we could hear the firemen, because, you know, when the firemen are laying prone, their jackets start beeping.
Beep.
Yeah, so we could hear them. A lot of guys had gotten knocked down. And then I just was trying to gather my troops. I had 140 guys down there and have no idea where anybody is. And obviously, as we knew, the cell phone towers got destroyed when the, you know, because we have actually had Taru had an antenna on top of one of the World Trade Centers.
Yeah.
You know, we regrouped. We do a lot of work, as you know, with the phone companies, Verizon, and they had a building right outside the Holland Tunnel, and we took that over as our command. And then we went on the 12s, and I slept in the manager's office for like 21 days and never went home.
Yeah.
And then we just try to regroup, come up with plans, how we're going to attack this. And obviously we worked side by side with Tommy Patel and his people from emergency service. And we were in that pile, you know, every day. Some guys stayed. We pulled out after 30 days, you know, when it went to from a rescue to now a construction site, really, basically. And a lot of firemen weren't happy about us pulling out, but
We'll get to that.
Yeah.
We'll get to that.
I got a little trouble for that one day. That's the most Joe Esposito's ever yelled at me. And I really didn't do anything, but he had taken a punch, and he was not a happy man. So, but yeah, you know.
So that, you know what I found fascinating is, so we're struggling with communications, right? The radio frequencies are jammed because there's thousands of people.
Everybody's trying to talk at the one time.
The cell phones are mushad, as we would say in the Bronx.
Yeah, they're not working at all.
And it's funny, but before the towers actually fell, my wife, I get a phone call on my pager with an 845 area code, which is Rockland County, where I lived. So I returned the call and somehow got it out. And it turns out that it was a friend of ours who worked in the medical supply world. and he had trucks of medical supplies at the George Washington Bridge that he was trying to get down to the site. Could you send somebody up to escort, which I did, but I also asked him to call my mom to let my wife and my kids know that I was okay.
Right.
So she works. My wife works in the school district. My mom calls my wife, tells her that I'm okay. She calls each of the girls' schools, because they were in 2 different schools. And she says, don't take them out of class, don't disturb them, but if they ask, let them know that Dad's okay.
Right.
So about an hour later, she's getting a hysterical phone call from my oldest daughter, Kyla. And my wife is like, no, he's okay. You know, he spoke to Mr. Mulholland, and she's like, but that was before the collapses. Where do you think he is?
Right.
And then we didn't get any phone calls out until like 10:30 that night.
No.
And there were rumors that we all got wiped out. So when I finally, so back at headquarters, we have no information from the scene. So I actually took my Nextel, and that's the one and only time I ever used it. And I went back to the site and I walked around and I was reporting back what was going on.
Yeah.
And the dust cloud was so strong that when I looked up at the North Tower, it was the debris field, and I thought that half the tower was still standing. And we were right by Vesey and West, and fire department has their command post set up. You know, the suitcase with the magnets,
Yep.
right? So I look up at 7 World Trade Center to this fire chief, and I said, Chief, what do you think about this building? He says, oh, that's definitely going to come down. Why are we standing here?
Right.
Let's get out of here.
Remember when
And
that
they-
collapsed too?
And they just gave me a blank stare, and I said, okay, all the cops. I got all the cops out of there, and, you know, couldn't control the fire department. As I'm walking around the site, you know, we're going through the debris field, and I stepped on something, and it was soft, and it was a police officer. It was George Howard, who I had worked. I didn't know this at the time, but I had worked with his brother Patty in the 4-3 precinct in the Bronx when I was a sergeant. And he was a Port Authority officer. He was their rope rescue expert, I believe.
Okay.
And we uncovered him and saw the patch and the gun and the whole thing. It turns out, if you remember President Bush, when he gave his speech to the country, he held up a shield. It was
Yeah.
George Howard's.
Oh, was it?
It was George
Yeah,
Howard's
I think I
shield.
kind of remember that, yeah.
And that was pretty tough,
Oh.
stepping on a cop.
Yeah.
And
Can't even imagine.
the days, people think about the day, and they're like, wow, that must have been crazy. Well, yeah, it was. It was definitely crazy. But the day was nothing compared to the days, weeks, and months afterwards.
Yeah.
So many of our officers left with stress from the job after that. And as a matter of fact, I had 3 guys in my office retired after that
Yeah. Yeah.
from stress, because one of our jobs was to go to the morgue. We had people at the morgue counting body parts.
Yeah.
So as they would come in, we would catalog everything. And when I went back to the scene and I was going around, the thing that was a little bit uplifting was our mobilizations were running like clockwork. Cops were coming in from across the city to these posts. They were getting put on rosters and then sent out with intelligent direction of what they were expected to do.
Right.
That was the good thing that I found. But we lost 23 officers that day, and we went to funerals and memorial services for months afterwards.
Yeah, I mean, I probably knew more firemen that passed than I did police officers, you know?
Well, since I was in ESU, I knew all 13 of them.
Yeah.
All 13. As a matter of fact, John Delara had the locker next to me when I was a police officer in the 4-6. Mike Curtin.
I still playing the Mike Curtin outing every year.
Yeah.
It's coming up on July 7th, I believe.
And dealing with those families, I said this last week on this show when we had Elizabeth French and Carlos Yanez here. The families of officers who die in the line of duty are just remarkable individuals because they give us strength.
Yeah.
And I'll never forget, you know, the families were holding up in police headquarters for weeks in the auditorium. And celebrities started coming in to visit them to try and lift their spirits. The single most respectful, reverent individual who came in was probably the last one who I expected to be in that fashion, and it was Deion Sanders.
Okay.
And he spent time with each one of the families, and you could just tell he was deeply affected by what was going on, and talking to the families, hugging them, and it, just really remarkable, because it's not the guy I saw on a football field going like this,
Right,
you
right.
know?
Yeah, prime time.
But those days afterwards were the worst part. The smell, right? You can't really describe it.
Yeah, it was a bad time for everybody. Do you remember the night it started raining and little sleet, and it started cooling the metal, and that eerie sound from it was like it groaned, the pile groaned.
Yeah.
And you know, it was, you know, we were so emotional, we were exhausted, working around the clock. You know, our guys were, you know, 12 hours on, 12 hours off with no days off. You know. At least for the first month.
First 7 or 8 days, I didn't go home either. And then I would go home at like 2 o'clock in the morning, get up at 5 and come back. And that's when I first saw Freedom Point, where the people were on the West Side Highway.
Mm-hmm. Yeah,
And
that was awesome. Actually, when I saw my guys getting depressed because, you know, we're out there trying to search, you know, trying to rescue, help in any way, we, one time we had this device that kind of lights up. If you remember, this is back when people still had pagers, beepers.
I had one.
Yeah, so we lit up all these beepers. It happened to be the train was going by, and it was all their beepers. We thought we hit, you know, like a pile of people buried underneath. You know, so I'd send them on a mission because they set up a quartermaster, if you remember, on the pier where the barrier pier was.
Yeah.
And we sent guys up for some supplies. I didn't really need supplies. We were getting supplies anyway, but it was just for them to see all these people come out and line, like almost like a parade, and they were all cheering
Signs
for
and
you.
cheering and
People, you know, giving
honking
you,
horns.
it was very uplifting for them.
Yeah.
And they'd come back, and there was a renewed spirit to get right back in the pile and, you know, start digging again.
Well, and I also talk about this. That was then, this is now. You know, the last show that we did was about dehumanizing the police.
Right.
And I say, where did we go from 9/11 that we're at this place now?
Yeah, you know, everybody treated us like America's heroes, you know, and
Yeah.
between us and the fire department, you know, the Port Authority, PD. Yeah, you were welcomed everywhere. If you went anywhere and they found out you had anything to do with 9/11, you couldn't pay for a drink.
The first time I went home for any time was probably about 6 weeks afterwards, maybe a month. I'm not sure. You know, I don't.
Right, everything blended
No
together.
idea. No idea. And my daughter had a volleyball game, and I was hyper aware of where the exits were, where's a good tactical position.
All of a sudden, right?
Right?
Yeah.
Suddenly, you know, we're at
Mindset
war.
changes.
What's happening now?
Yeah.
And when I walked in, got a standing ovation
Of course.
because the people of the town knew who I was and saw me there. They stopped the game. Really remarkable.
Yeah. Yeah, America came together, and we felt like we had so much support from every police agency and fire agency from around the country. It was amazing, you know, the people that showed up. I mean, guys I went to the FBI Academy with, you know, they drove up from Alabama.
You know, I had some mixed emotions when that was happening because we got a ton of help, no two ways about it.
Yeah.
But then it turned into a tourist event. People are taking pictures on the pile.
Yeah,
and
you're always
so
going to
on
get the
and so forth.
looky-loos, you know, that happens.
And anytime I saw that, anytime I saw it, I had to remind them that this is not a tourist location. This is sacred ground right now.
Yeah.
And
Well, the best was when we threw everybody out. It was just the people that needed to be there.
we'll be right back with more Behind the Badge. I talked about that a couple of weeks ago here. When the mayor decided to bring in a National Guard, I posted them. for perimeter security. And the next day I went down and they wouldn't let me in. They told me it was for emergency personnel only, which was the same thing that happened on like day 2, because I'm wearing a suit.
Right.
Right, I'm a deputy commissioner, and I've got all these rocks and pebbles in my shoes that are all torn up now. And one of my guys says, "Hey, boss, they got boots over there." I'm like, "Oh, that's great." So I go over and I'm like, "Do you have 10.5 double E?" And he goes, "This is for emergency personnel only." I was like, "Okay, let me explain this again."
Right. Yeah, I went through a couple pairs of boots. One pair of boots actually melted on one of the I-beams.
Yeah.
So as I walk away, I can hear this flapping, and it was like flip-flops. And I'm like, is that me? These were fairly new boots, and I had to throw them out. And I ended up with a nice pair of Red Wing boots. Beautiful. But when the plane crashed in the Rockaways, they got soaked with jet fuel.
Flight 800? Was
No,
it 800?
no. It was going to the Dominican Republic.
No, I remember.
I don't think it was
What
800.
okay.
No. I'm trying to remember what the flight number was.
That fell on Morley's house.
That's correct, right? Sue Morley's house, right next door. Mike and Sue. You
Yeah.
know. I mean, literally right across the street.
Yeah.
But we respond. Obviously, Tyru doing what we do, and we're right there. And my boots got saturated with jet fuel, and that smell I had to throw those boots out too.
Yeah.
So we went through quite a.
I wouldn't have kept them.
Yeah. So.
Well, the other thing that people need to know is that the fallout from this is still occurring. There were about 2,800 people killed that day.
Yeah.
And,
close to,
I stopped counting when I saw the list of police officers that died attributable to 9/11 related cancer.
Yeah. Yeah.
I stopped counting when I got to 50 who I knew. And
Do you go to the World Trade Center Health Clinic?
I haven't done it in a while. I got to get back.
You gotta try. They keep finding skin cancers, on me, and thank God they just cut them out and I move on.
Extra parts.
Yeah, exactly. I was like, could you do a little tummy tuck, but it's one of the number one cancers coming out of 9/11. Who'd have thought when we were there 20-something years ago?
Well, the other thing
Worried
was,
about skin cancer.
we didn't have any breathing apparatuses.
No, we were
And
using
if you-
painter's masks.
Yeah,
first
you
couple
couldn't,
of days.
and you couldn't breathe,
No, exactly.
especially because it was warm.
Yeah.
So,
Then they gave us the mask with the filters, and we
Right.
didn't realize you were supposed to swap those filters out.
right.
They were clogged and filthy when we finally looked at them. Yeah.
Well, everybody around that time was saying that, yeah, we're never going to forget this. And I, being the sarcastic individual I am, I said things like, no, they're going to forget this by tomorrow.
No.
And I kind of feel like they have.
I don't know.
A lot of people have.
I-
A lot of people have it.
You know me, I'm the ultimate optimist. I try not to be pessimistic. I think people, when they're reminded, they're not thinking about it like, maybe we were, because we were right there on the front line, if you will. And obviously we had a lot of people that we were responsible for to try to take care of. So
Then came the funerals, though. I went to 3 in one day.
yeah, funerals are tough. Well, I mean, that's how the fire department ended up with a ceremonial unit. Before that, if a firefighter was killed, it was done by the local house where he was from. But because they had so many deaths, Pete Moog's brother, Mike, and his name just went out of my head, Joe, they went to the department and asked to form a formalized ceremonial unit, Joe LaPointe. And Joe and Mike Moog, they really did a great job with that to honor all 343 people that they lost.
Yeah. And then unfortunately some families gave up and they would have memorial services, and then they would get something that had some DNA on it, and
Yeah.
they'd have a funeral.
Yeah,
So-
it was sad. I don't know what but I had a lot of kids from the neighborhood where I grew up in Brooklyn that were firemen who died. Went to all those funerals, so it was a bad time for all of us, and those families that you feel bad for them. All those, as I call Tuesday's children, all those kids that grew up without a parent. It was tough. No amount of money ever compensates.
No.
You're missing
Never.
a parent. It's a tough thing. So
Well,
we were fortunate. We survived some dark days, but and now you always did the roll call.
Oh yeah.
You'd call us on the morning of. There's about 6 or 7 guys that, all from the football team, all work with me and Taru, Mitch and Brett, Pete, Eddie.
The year after 9/11, when we played the fire department,
That's when you first started, right?
yeah.
In the locker room.
It was a very emotional day, obviously, and in the locker room, I did a roll call of the 23 officers that we lost. We marked them all present.
Yeah.
And since then, we do it every September 11th. Although, me being far away, we now do it via text.
We do, yeah. If you remember that game, we played at Giant Stadium out in the Meadowlands. So we had worked, Pete had called me up and says, hey, what do you think about doing the game in Giant Stadium? So I get together with Neil Walsh and Troy Roberts from the fire department, and we go out and we meet the principals out there that run the Meadowlands. And sure enough, we did that game, and we had all the NFL stars out there. Boomer Esiason help us. We had Ronan Tynan sing, God Bless America.
Yeah.
Fantastic.
Well, that was the other thing, too. Just right after September 11th, the Yankees are in the World Series.
Yeah.
And George Bush
George
is
Bush
throwing
threw
out the
pitch,
first
yeah.
pitch, and Jeter's telling him not to bounce it. Right? But you can't describe the feelings that whole time frame really just brought to bear on everybody involved.
Yeah. A lot of good guys. Unfortunately, didn't make it.
Yeah. And then we're in places like Afghanistan. We lost first cop we lost out there.
Yeah, he worked for me
He
in
was a
transit
transit
district
guy.
too.
Yeah. He was a transit guy,
Yeah. Yeah.
and that's
He actually did like 6 months and then deployed. He never really, we never got to know him.
and that's the funeral where I lost my mind because elected officials would show up right as the ceremony started and stand in front of us, and that was simply unacceptable.
Yeah.
So we came up with the pens where we put them into, and that's the first one that we did it. And I'll never forget when we did the Kiss of Peace, I turned around and Hillary Clinton was sitting behind me instead of in front of me.
Okay.
And we were first couple of rows, and that's all who was going to be there.
Right. Well, George Bush did invite us, the three, myself, Pete, and Eddie, with Neil Walsh, Troy Roberts from the fire department, and Mike Heffernan. Remember Mike, who played for us and then rolled over?
How could you forget
Hef, great guy. We got invited down to the White House
Oh, I didn't know
because
that.
he was supposed to appear at the game. It was an unannounced, and Secret Service was there.
Didn't even tell me.
I didn't tell anybody. I couldn't tell anybody. So the only one that knew was my son Don, who was only about 16 at the time, and he was my aide de camp, if you will. And we were walking around with Secret Service, and then all of a sudden they were like, "You ain't coming." We were like, "Ah." And Vito Fasella from Staten Island, he had set it up. He was a councilman at the time. I'm sorry, congressman at the time, and he was the one that set it up, the visit. And then when it didn't happen, all of a sudden we get another call, and he's friendly with Pete Moog, and he says, "You guys, could you come down to Washington?" I said, "Yeah, I think I can make time in my schedule to go visit the President of the United States." So we got to spend about 19 minutes. Somebody timed us in the Oval Office with then George Bush.
Wow, I didn't know.
And he showed us one funny thing was he had Saddam Hussein's sidearm, in a shadow box that the Delta Force had gotten him. And he says, "Oh, you cops will understand what this means." He goes, "Loaded and operable." And it's pretty cool to hear the President of the United States kind of use a term that we use in policing, loaded and operable. And we went, "Oh, wow." And he says, "Yeah, the Lion of the Desert went down out like a coward." So that was pretty cool. And then he gave us all challenge coins.
Now, you know, the day that they got bin Laden was my first day here in Chicago.
Oh, really?
And naturally, the first thing I do is I call Espo. And Joe Esposito is standing in front of his house banging pots, screaming, "The devil is dead, the devil is dead." Chief of department for the NYPD.
Yeah.
But what a classic guy.
He's-
And so many people stepped up. Joe Dunn,
Yep.
Joe Esposito, Monsignor Romano was everywhere doing everything all the time.
Yeah. Romano has now become the McAllister family priest. He's married me. He's married my two oldest. He's baptized everyone.
Oh, you're kidding me?
And he's also baptized all the grandchildren. I have 9
He's,
grandchildren.
he's a wonderful man.
Yeah. All but 2, I think. He's baptized. So 7 of the 9.
I remember him being in Times Square with us on New Year's Eve, that December 31st, and the feeling that we all had wasn't so good, you know.
No.
Worried about what could happen, what did we miss, so on and so forth. But
One guy I do want to just give a shout out, if we don't mind. We talked to him today. He's going to be turning 99.
oh,
in
Doc
June.
Andino, yeah.
Doc Andino, who was our team doctor. Talked about the football team earlier. He was our team doctor. He had been a second-grade detective and then went to Italy, to Bologna, to medical school, and then became back as a doctor. And as you said, you were working 3 jobs. Well, he worked 5. He was
Yeah.
the commissioner of boxing for New York State, and he was the ME for Staten Island. And I always kidded him. I said, I'm not sure having a team doctor who's also the ME for Staten Island is really a good thing. But what a wonderful man. And we just had a luncheon with him recently. He lives in Arizona now. And he flew in, and Eddie Gardner and Pete Moog picked him up and brought him, and about 30 guys from the team welcomed him at a luncheon we had in Floral Park, and it was a really good day. It was so good to see him, and he's so funny. He's still a character.
Yeah.
Like I said, he's going to turn 99. And I says, hey, you want to do dinner? Or he goes, dinner? I won't be awake. I got to do lunch. He's a great man.
Yeah.
But yeah, I want to give him a happy 99 in June.
Yeah, well, there's a ton of people who stepped up.
Yeah.
A ton of people who stepped up, and some who didn't. Right? There was 1 or 2 people who kind of like skedaddled
Yeah.
as quickly as they could.
We remember the great men that we worked with, like Joe Dunn and Joe Esposito and all those really solid people.
I remember Kerrick called a meeting at like 4 o'clock in the afternoon at police headquarters for the executive staff, and looking at these guys coming in and who was in what condition, and it was pretty interesting. They had 1,000-yard stairs.
Oh yeah, it was traumatic for everybody.
Yeah.
I looked like the Pillsbury Doughboy. Besides, I was covered in white, everything in white.
Yeah.
I had actually taken a shower. The guys from Taru got a water cooler bottle and gave me a street shower.
I did that for Eddie Hartnett.
Yeah. So. And then they got me clothes. We were down near Chinatown at the time, and they got me clothes from every little vendor. I was like, that shirt's not going to fit me.
Yeah, I was going to say.
Then my wife started, she was out on maternity leave. She ended up coming back to work early, obviously. And she made her way into where we were temporary headquarters on Varick Street, and dropped off a bag of clothes for me.
Yeah,
so I'd have something to friggin' wear.
Yeah, Gina did the same thing.
Yeah. And then I told her, 2 McAllisters can't be here. You need to go home because somebody's got to raise our family. I'm fully expecting that we're going to die because, as you said, 7 World Trade fell, and then girders were falling, and it was just. Remember the alarms going off as the building swayed?
Yep.
That was the scariest sound you ever heard. And now everybody running from the pile. I do remember kind of a funny story, amusing story. We were on the pit, now we're on the pile, now we're in the pit, the middle one, and I'm with John Walsh. And John had given up smoking, and all of a sudden we hear, and everybody runs. And we could see them all scurrying, and where are we going to run?
Yeah.
By the time we get out of the pit, we're gone. So all the emergency service cops and the Taru team that was there, and I was just doing rounds. We sit down, and John opens up, and he's smoking a cigarette. And I go, oh, John, you smoking again? He goes, look around. I go, smoke him if you got him, yeah. John went through some of his struggles down in, he's been battling some illnesses, but he's doing well, thank God.
Yeah.
Yeah, I had to write a lot of affidavits for people to say that they were actually there, because, our records, some things got destroyed. Thank God Tommy Armette had the presence of mind to and Louis Voza, my 2 lieutenants, to record our comings and goings, inventory, equipment.
Well, again, thank you for coming out here, Steve, and
Thank
sharing
you for
your
having
stories.
me. Yeah.
It's always great to see you anyway, but
Yep.
this is a little bit different. So
Well, good luck with the show.
yeah, we'll see where it goes.
Yeah.
But I think this last segment truly talks to the nobility of our profession, in that people were running in while everybody else was running out.
Right.
And actually, one guy in particular was Officer Perry. By 3 o'clock that afternoon, we knew that we had lost 22 officers.
Oh, this is the guy who was going down to retire, right?
He was at the pension section
Yeah.
retiring.
Yeah, I didn't know
He
him,
was
but
off
I know
duty
of
and
him.
ran over,
Yeah.
as he's walking out the
Yeah.
door. So
Terrible.
I don't think we can demonstrate any greater nobility than how first responders
No.
do that on a regular basis. So
Well,
with that,
Moira Smith,
Morris Smith
she had gone into the building, saved somebody, brought him out,
Right.
and then went back in.
back in. Yep. So.
Crazy.
Well, with that, we're going to wrap. So, again, thanks for being here. And instead of saying never forget, let's say always remember.
Always remember.